Hi, my name is Tony Bibbs and I'm with the GForge Group, and this video is the third installment from our series of GForge tutorials, and today I want to show you how to customize your tickets in GForge. Now, in our prior videos in this series, we shared this checklist for you to follow when setting up a new GForge project. For those following along, we will continue with this list by customizing tickets. The ticketing system in GForge allows you to track just about anything. So for example, you may have one set of tickets, which we call trackers, for things like bugs and new features, while you can have a separate tracker for things like, say, support. In this video, we use a real-world example by starting with a bare-bones tracker used for managing bugs and features, and then add some custom fields. So starting from your project's homepage, use the GForge menu to access the project's administration page. Then go to the Trackers tab. Now click on the gear icon next to our ticketing system to access its settings. Initially, administering tickets may look a bit daunting, so let's quickly explain all the tabs. The main tab is for general settings, including the tracker name, description, and visibility. The Fields tab is where we're going to focus our attention today. This is where you can manage the data you want to collect on each ticket. The Workflow tab will be the feature of a later video in this series. This is where you can define workflow rules to ensure your tickets are handled in a consistent manner. The Notifications tab is where you can give custom instructions to users when they submit or browse tickets. You can also configure the tracker to generate auto-response messages when new tickets are created. The Submitter and the Assignees Alerts tabs are useful for trackers where you want to send notifications when a ticket remains untouched for some predetermined amount of time. This is particularly useful in trackers like support. Finally, on the Commits Actions tab, you can have commits trigger either the reassignment of a ticket or even change the value of a field. So again, today we're focusing on customizing your tickets, so let's go to the Fields tab. Now before we begin adding custom fields to our ticketing system, please note that GForge does make the distinction between standard fields and extra fields. Standard fields are intrinsic fields that exist on each and every GForge ticket. While you can't delete them, you may choose to disable them. Here you'll note that I've disabled the sprint field only because we cover managing sprints in a later video. Additionally, I have disabled the waiting for field. This field is used primarily for support tickets, allowing you to know if a ticket is waiting on a customer or someone on the team. We will cover setting up and managing a support tracker in a future video as well. Okay, so before you begin customizing your fields, you should spend some time analyzing your needs. For now, building a simple list of fields you need to track will be sufficient. Since we're going to start with a real-world example, here are some common fields we plan on adding to our tickets. Ticket type, which is required, component, which is required, the get work branch, and then we'll also update the status field. So as you can see, we have ticket type, which will allow us to tell the difference between a bug, an enhancement, and a security vulnerability. It's worth noting that here is where we see a common mistake. Some teams will create separate trackers for bugs and enhancements, and usually this is a really bad idea because for most teams, the data in the ticket is identical. On the flip side, compare the data that you might have in a support ticket. Support tickets will likely have different statuses with a vastly different workflow and even unique fields for things like the customer who created it and the version of software they're having trouble with. In cases like these, it makes sense to break them out into their own tracker. As a general rule of thumb, you should try to avoid creating new trackers in your project unless it's truly needed. So armed with our list of fields, let's begin setting up our tickets by adding a drop-down for the ticket type. So in the modal, we'll give the label ticket type, and we'll go ahead and mark it as required, and we'll also check the On New box. The On New option indicates if a field can be submitted when creating a new ticket. This is a handy option when you have a dropdown that isn't required and when you want to hide the dropdown on new tickets. Once we have our options added to the dropdown, let's ensure they're in the right order, and we won't bother adding a default value even though we could. Now let's save our new field by clicking OK, which returns us to our field list. So again, let's go ahead and add a new dropdown, this time with the label component, and we'll mark it as required, and again check the On New box. The component will be a logical section in our project that the bug or enhancement belongs to. For our example, we'll add component options for database, API, front end, and then a catch-all called Other. With those options added to the dropdown, let's ensure they're in the right order, and like before, we won't specify a default value. Let's finish our component field by clicking the OK button, which returns us to our field list. Now let's add one more field where we can track our Git work branch. This is a handy field for those that implement a Git workflow where each ticket gets implemented in its own branch. Let's label this field as work branch, and we'll make this field optional since you typically won't have one when the ticket is created. Keep in mind in a future video, we will make sure the work branch is required at some point within our workflow. So now let's go ahead and save this field. And at this point, we've added our custom fields. Now the only important thing left to do is configure our statuses properly. You've probably noticed that the status field in our list was already there, but you could easily add it. To edit the status, click on its edit icon. And as you can see, yeah, these statuses are far too simplistic for any realistic project. So let's change them up a bit. So let's change open to do and closed to doing, and make sure that the doing status represents an open status. For the status, while you may have any number of status options, it's important for reporting purposes that GForge knows which ones have an underlying state of open or closed. So now let's add a status called needs merge. This status will represent our pull request status, where we request that someone merges the code in our Git work branch to our main integration branch. To wrap this up, let's add two closed statuses, one for done and the other for invalid. Now let's wrap up and go ahead and save our status. And with our custom fields added, I want to point out that while we only worked with dropdowns and text boxes, GForge does allow you to add other field types such as multi-selects, dates, numbers, and text areas. So be sure to explore your options as you customize your tickets. So the last thing that we want to do is validate that the ticket now reflects our changes. So go to the menu, head down to your tickets, click the plus icon to add a new ticket, and then just carefully inspect that all our custom fields are there and show the options that we've configured. So that wraps up this video on customizing your tickets, and you're now ready to move on to our next video in this series where we'll implement a system for managing our backlog.